We're interviewing today for the Hamilton College Jazz Archive here in San Diego, and I am extremely pleased to have Ruth Lyon with me, and we're going to talk about a lot of things, mostly about Blue Note Records. And just to get us started here, couldn't do any better than to listen to Thelonious and it seems like sometimes the simplest things are the best, you know, and I think these gentlemen certainly understood that to some extent.
Oh, yes.
I would like to ask you, before we get to Alfred and his vision of Blue Note Records, you must have been a jazz fan before you met him. Is that right?
I was.
How did you come to love jazz?
Actually, through my mother, who had the first African-American school of music in the United States, the Bertha Hansberry School of Music. And we had early wind-up Victrolas.
Oh.
Well, my mother, of course, was in classical music, but she was not against jazz or any popular music. And with this wind-up Victrola, my brother and I was 6 years of age, heard an Ellington, one of those, you know, was Blue Bubbles. And we just danced, and we were just so happy with that music. And I think I've been a jazz fan ever since then.
Really touched something in you, huh?
It really did.
Yeah. Were those 78s at that time, or was it a 10-inch?
A 78, yes.
Yeah. Well, how did it come about that you became a jazz DJ?
That came about in the early 50s. There was a place in New York called the Palm Cafe, and I used to listen to them on the radio a lot. There was a guy there who was just a magnificent jockey, Jack Walker, and I thought, well, gee, I'd love to do that. And I'd always been sort of PR, that type of work, but I was getting a little bored with it, and so I thought, well, I'll go there and ask them if they'll hire me. And I did, and they hired me.
Wow. What were you doing up to that point?
Well, up to that point, I was married, and it was interesting being married, but not quite. I needed something that would keep me a little bit more out and involved.
Yeah.
I was involved, of course. I had children and all, but it just seemed to me that I needed to do something that was in me, which was the music. And I listened all the time, and I said, well, gee, I know this music, and I love it, and I can talk about it. And so I got a bunch of records, and I made myself a little tape, a practice tape, and so I went and asked them for the job. I was surprised they did hire me.
What kind of hours was your show on? Was it?
Our show was called Life Begins at Midnight. And this person that I learned from, Jack Walker, he just knew how to program so out of this world, and he was from Canada, and he had a voice that was just magnificent. And of course, I admired all of that, and it was a thrill working with Jack. And meeting people, I met prominent people. There was Dorothy Kilgallen, who came in, and of course, I've always been interested in public relations, so I promoted our show, and it got to be the top on the station.
Cool. Did you have a freedom to choose what you wanted to play?
Yes, we did have the freedom to choose what we wanted to play. And of course, before I met Alfred, all I wanted to play was Blue Note, and I did. And I guess that's why, you know, maybe he came in one night and wanted to know, who's that crazy girl who plays so many Blue Notes? But I got to know him through being there, I suppose.
Yeah.
But I think it's more than that. I think I was supposed to get to know him.
That this was a meeting that was fated to happen, perhaps.
Yes, I think so.
And you told me that you liked him right away.
Oh, I loved him right away. Absolutely. The first sight, that was it. I was like, you know, the boom. Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. Here you are playing his records, and
Yes.
there he is.
Yes.
Great.
I feel that way. In
Yeah.
fact, there was one Grant Green, I just love that, Am I Blue? And I said, Alfred, I have to play this and play it and play it and play it, because if you leave me and I listen to that and I haven't heard it, it's going to, I wouldn't be able to handle it. So I listened and listened and listened, and after he's gone, I can't listen.
Yeah.
Am I Blue?
Sure.
It was gorgeous. That have you heard? You know Grant Green.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to talk for a moment about Alfred coming from Germany in the 30s, and whether or not the atmosphere, the social atmosphere that he lived in, do you think it had an effect on him looking for something else and finding it in American jazz?
I do believe so, because Alfred had a very structured personality. He was a person who had come up in a very, he was raised in military schools from a little kid, maybe 5 or 6 years of age. So everything, I mean, he was meticulous in everything he did. So I think that when he was a kid, he went skating, and he heard, instead of there being skating that day, there was Sam Wooding, the orchestra, old-time orchestra. This was back in the 20s. And so he went and listened to them, and he never got over that. You know, that rhythm, that freedom, that soul, everything that was in that music. So he just, he began to collect records, and then he and his friend Frank Wolf would play their records together, and then for some reason, because of, I guess, the political situation there, they had to separate, and Alfred came to the States and Frank stayed, because many people didn't believe it was as bad as it truly was. And Frank stayed, and Alfred came here, and then in 1920, no, it was 1930, he went back, and Frank still wanted to stay. So Alfred and his mother went to Chile, and they stayed there for a number of years. I don't know the biography, the way. I can tell you, when you interview Michael Cascuna, he knows everything.
Okay, every move,
I only know mine from the, you know, the experience of it with him. But that was actually what happened. The rigidity, I'll call it, the way the culture was a very
Strict.
very strict.
Yeah.
And he loved that free and easy way that the African Americans had at that time, and he wanted to be a part of it. And the way he could be a part of it, maybe in a little bit we'll go to, I'd like to say that he, through John Hammond, he got to be a part of it.
Oh, I didn't realize John Hammond had a part in getting Alfred on the road to
He did
record.
a very, very big part in his life.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that, as long as
Well-
because he finally came to the U.S. to stay.
Yes, he did.
And that was what year? About what year?
I
After
think
Chile.
that might have been about 1937.
Okay.
And he wanted to get more enmeshed in jazz. And he joined a club in New Jersey. He lived in New York. He joined a club in New Jersey. I don't know exactly what they called it, but it was a jazz, like people who just loved the music. And they collected the records and they played the records. And you know, I mean, they just go wild over what they were hearing. And so John Hammond gave a concert, and I do. Someone sent me from Japan a copy of that concert, which I've been too appreciative of it to even play it. But this is the concert that Alfred began Blue Note Records with, because he used to see John Hammond. Alfred was always working, and he'd see him in the post office. And Hammond thought, well, gee, this guy is a little bit, what is it, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, he never stopped working.
Right.
Alfred could do 5 things at the same time and know what he was doing.
Yeah.
So he would see him in the post office. And so he said, you know, I'd like you to come and hear my concert at Carnegie Hall, Spirituals to Swing. And Alfred said, oh, I'd love to. And of course, he went. And there, he happened to hear these 2 guys.
Oh, yeah, sure. They did the piano duet there. Yeah.
The Meade Lux Lewis and Albert Ammons. And so he went backstage. I can get a little bit of the feeling that he must have had.
Yeah, you can.
I mean, you know, because when you hear this record, even though today we might consider it dated, but it had such a vitality to it. And Alfred, being the person who reacted immediately to something that he really liked, he went backstage and he said, I belong to a club of people who love jazz. Would you make a 12-inch record so you wouldn't have to stop playing? You could just play and play and play, you know, because they only had, I think at that time, I don't know, I really am not able to, I'm too excited to tell you, but you could only play for maybe 3 minutes.
Sure.
And so he said, you please come and play and you don't have to stop. So the guy said, well, will you pay us? And he said, well, what will you charge? It's $100. So Alfred said, yes, I'll pay you. And he did, and he made the records, and he played them for his friends, and his friends all wanted copies, and more people wanted copies, and before he knew it, he was in Blue Note Records.
Wow.
So that was John Hammond,
Yeah.
whom I had the pleasure of talking with and really telling him how much I appreciated his making that life possible. I don't think Alfred would have gotten into business had it not been for that.
We talked a little bit on the phone a couple times about what it was about African American musicians especially that seemed to attract him. Do you feel that it was a mission for him to promote their music and record it, or what was it?
I think it was that he was so interested in that particular musical expression, and I don't know that it was actually a mission any more than it was just something that he wanted to hear, and he wanted to, whoever else might want to hear it, he'd like to give it to them. He was a very giving person, and I think that's what it was. And he couldn't hear enough of that music, you know, to please himself, so then he would go ahead and record these musicians. It was like Frank, his associate, put it in this way. The blues were always the basis of everything, and maybe the blues could be rhythmic and all, but there was always that sort of certain undercurrent of soul or religiosity, something of that sort that he would hear. And both Frank and Alfred were religious people. So that the music was like, for them, an expression of their own souls. So yes, he did record a number of non-African American artists, but they were artists who had that, what he was listening for.
Right. That's so hard to pin down, but saying in the same sentence soul and blues and religious feeling, that makes a lot of sense to me.
That's it.
That it just, every one of those things has a certain thing that touches you in your heart, and obviously that this music just wouldn't let him go, right? He had to do this.
He had to.
Yeah.
Really did.
That's great. So when the label was first launched, then the whole idea of distribution and selling it and all that comes into play.
It does.
Yeah. Did he have any experience in marketing? Did you have any experience in marketing you later helped him with?
Well, yes, I did public relations and artist promotion for him. However, himself, he just had a natural intellect. He had in Germany learned accounting, and he was just, as I said before, a very careful, caring person. His concentration was so, it couldn't be broken. I mean, that was why I was saying that with Billie Holiday,
Right.
that don't come into my recording session and, you know, I
Yeah.
mean, we're here for business.
Right.
And what Dexter Gordon said, you just have to play better for Blue Note. And the guys came on a Blue Note date. They knew everybody was going to do their best.
Yeah.
You know, they loved him and they wanted to do the best. And they did.
Yeah.
That's why so many of the records are considered very, very
Really?
much classic.
That's very high compliment to get that from the musicians themselves,
Yeah.
that they wanted to do their best. Who were some of the very first artists that he was able to record?
Well, among the first who became very popular, I think we have a picture maybe we can show of Sidney Bechet. You remember, you know of,
Sure.
he had a great career in France, and of course he came here and he was recognized too. But maybe we'll show these later.
No,
but
that's fine.
here we have him looking.
Yeah.
This was, Frank took this picture in France. He became French.
Yes. He had a street named after him and everything, right?
And now let's see if I have another Bechet. But however, going on, I don't want to hold things up this way, but some of the other artists were, oh gee, at the moment I can hardly think. But
How many records would they actually print the first time around?
those are things I never paid a lot of
No.
attention to. Know how many, you know, that business side.
Yeah.
I didn't pay too much attention to. I'm sorry.
That's all right. And when you said you promoted the artists,
Yes.
how did you go about doing that? Was it through trying to get airplay and all that
Airplay,
kind of? Yeah.
particularly. And
Yeah.
I recall on the 25th anniversary of Blue Note, I had a lot of buddies who were radio people, and we invited them all. We had a party at the Playboy Club, and about 3 times more people than we invited
Yeah.
radio people came. But that was very indicative of the fact that the music was very popular. New York was very jazz-oriented
Yeah.
at that time, and so you had not trouble. I take the artists to the programs, and I've forgotten the first Coast to Coast program we had. Who did we have? Duke Pearson.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, it was Coast to Coast.
Yeah.
And we did that. And then we got on the Steve Allen show with the Jazz Messengers, which was very momentous, very exciting. And the little guys, they had their little, at that time they wore the Nehru jackets, you know, those high jackets, you know, and they were just so fabulous.
Let's talk about Art Blakey for a
Oh,
minute.
yeah,
you
Art
know.
Blakey. Well, Blakey was, in my opinion, maybe the most exemplary of the Blue Note artists, because he did express what Alfred was looking for, which was that rhythm. And they had a great relationship. Blakey was, you know, was just like his brother. And the Jazz Messengers, I have something I'd like to show you of that later, but that was one of the most successful of the records of the 50s when they did Birdland, One Night at Birdland, and then they followed, that was so successful with Blakey and Horace Silver and Kenny Durham, and gee, I don't remember all the guys, but that is a classic record. And then they followed that up by going to the Bohemia, Club Bohemia, and I remember that one particularly well because Blue Note had begun to attract attention because it was beginning to make hits. And I guess that's, you know,
Yeah.
attention gathering.
Sure.
Well, that night, Rudy Van Gelder, who was the engineer, and he got the Blue Note sound. He and Alfred got together and got that sound that's very distinctive. You only hear it on Blue Note. And he had his all his equipment here, and then Alfred and Frank were running all over the place, but it seemed that every record executive in town showed up that night because they wanted to see what's happening here, you know. But it was a blowing night, and it was fantastic. Still one of my favorite records.
Yeah.
You know, one night at the Cafe Bohemia.
Yeah.
And that was Art Blakey. That was the very young Horace Silver. And I can hear that music at night. I'm sleeping and I hear it. You know, it was so fiery, so original, never heard before. So, and Kenny Dorham, and of course, you know, he was one of the great trumpeters of Blue Note, Kenny Dorham. And
it's almost like it could have been the Art Blakey Jazz School.
It was, and it became that.
Yeah.
You know, Wynton Marsalis was with Blakey toward the end. And
Wayne Shorter.
Wayne Shorter.
All those guys.
Yeah, Blakey was a great teacher, and he was still very patient.
Uh-huh.
You know, I mean, some teachers are not, you know, you got to get it.
Yeah.
No, he was, and he let you expand, so I heard from the fellows, you could do, and, you know, he let you come out.
He must have encouraged the guys to write, too.
I'm sure he did.
Because look at all the great tunes.
Blues
They just came out here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. He's quite a legacy just on his own.
Yes,
you
he
know.
is.
Was also wondering about the tough times for Blue Note. Was there tough times? I mean, you know, when you look at Blue Note, you go, oh man, what a successful label. And unless you really know the realities of a record business, were there tough years for you guys?
From the very beginning to the very end, it was tough. It was an independent label. They were battling the giants all the way. If they wanted to get Miles Davis, they had to get Miles Davis by way of Cannonball Adderley. One of the best or most outstanding hits they had was, I've forgotten the name of it. You know,
one of the early Cannonball records?
The one where Cannonball plays with Miles Davis.
Yeah, I think it's called A Portrait of Cannonball or something.
Yeah,
Or it's got that autumn leaves.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, well, that came about only because they permitted Miles to be a sideman. Can you imagine Miles being a sideman? Yeah. And
Yeah.
so, but Miles actually truly was the leader, but he did go ahead and do it. And of course, it came out magnificently well. And speaking of the guys having great respect for Alfred and his musical, I'm just going to say it, it's true, genius. At the end of Autumn Leaves, Miles said to Alfred, "Is that what you wanted, Al?" He knew he'd done it, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Is that what you wanted?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Very, very.
When there was there was a major switchover when the 12-inch LP came in. Did that hit you guys pretty hard?
Very, very.
Yeah.
It meant all that stock.
You couldn't sell it anymore. Ooh, wow. Did that switchover come as a complete surprise?
Almost completely.
Yeah.
Very much like the CDs today. You know, people thought tapes were going to, you know, we put them in the car and they're wonderful and everything.
Right.
No, that came pretty fast.
So there wasn't any preparing for it?
One night he got into bed to go to sleep, and I had gotten to sleep. He got up and he walked the floor all night. And he decided the next day he would get a loan and he'd go ahead and persevere. He was ready to give up.
Did you have to take music that had already been recorded and repress it? Was that what the loan was for, or was it to get new equipment to go to the 12-inch?
Yeah, it was to just carry on, because truthfully, you asked me about tough times. I don't ever remember Blue Note being more than 6 months away from bankruptcy. It was tough, hard times, work, but love for the work.
Yeah. In all those years, you lived in New York?
Yes.
Yeah. That's where it was happening.
It was happening. Out here on the coast, there were a lot of things happening, and he got to know some of the people who were recording. You know, it's a very small industry. Everybody knows what everybody else is doing, and he liked what he was hearing, but he couldn't get into that, and he appreciated those who were.
Yeah.
You know, Dave Brubeck, John Desmond, the different guys who were great artists, but he could hardly get the guys that he had. You know, they were being taken away.
Sure.
You know the story about Jimmy Smith? He had Jimmy Smith, and as soon as he became a star, off he went to a big label.
Yeah. Oh, that has to be frustrating.
Terrible.
Yeah. You know, it's like your children.
Yes, they are.
They're, you know, nurturing them, and boom, then they're gone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you two have a chance to experience the 52nd Street heyday in New York?
Yes, very much so. Yeah.
Can you just
it was
give me an
one
idea?
club to another. It was absolutely divine. You could hear everybody: Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, Errol Garner. Yeah, it was somehow you were aware that this was tremendous, but you didn't realize that it, you know, it had its time like everything.
Right.
So, yeah, but it was magnificent. You could walk in here and, you know, all those clubs, you know, you could walk in and just hear the most wonderful music.
Wow. Were there ever any really difficult recording sessions that you attended that that just either didn't happen or somehow miraculously did come through, but it didn't look like they were?
I would say, I don't know what the percentage is, but his standards were so high that oftentimes he'd write on the master, the mother, he'd write, "This record not good enough for Blue Note," and he wouldn't bring it out.
Oh.
Yeah, many that didn't make it.
And the musicians were getting paid, what, the union scale
And more,
and more?
and more.
He treated them right. Is that
He treated he was the soul of honesty and givingness.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not just saying that
Yeah.
because he was the love of my life. I can be objective in when I look and see, and I saw it.
Yeah.
The man was just a beautiful person.
Uh-huh. Well, let's take a look at some of your other things you have here, because I wanted to look at this photo. Can you tell me what year this was?
That photo was in 1956.
Uh-huh.
And we had gone to Birdland. Sometimes he'd have 3 sessions in a week. And we had gone there and we were listening. I don't recall who we were listening to at that night, but, you know, on the scene and enjoying it. And Teddy Rigg, who he knew quite well, joined us at the bar. And someone came by and said, "Oh, can we take your picture?" And they did.
Yeah.
And that's how that happened. But yeah, that Birdland was a beautiful place in those days. They had the top talent, and Bud Powell. I had a very nice experience. I was doing, as I was saying, PR for Blue Note at the time, and Bud had come over, and the gentleman, Francis Padres, who was his, I guess you might say, patron.
Oh.
And he was there, and I remember we were upstairs in a room that they had provided for Alfred and Frank and this gentleman, Mr. Padres, to confer. And Bud was really he had, you know, he wasn't too well mentally.
Yes.
But he
yes.
still played very, very well.
Uh-huh.
And I recall that took place at Birdland. And I was into giving awards. That was part of what I did.
Uh-huh.
As I was telling you, times were tough. And while I worked for Blue Note, I also worked for a beer company, whom I talked into a promotion with jazz.
No kidding. Tell me about that.
And so I said, you know, we have some wonderful artists in town, and I'd like to give some awards. And those artists are Lionel Hampton, Bud Powell, and Jimmy Smith. And they got the awards together, And I went and presented these awards through their auspices. And so that, the one for Bud Powell was done at Birdland, the one for Jimmy Smith was done at the Apollo Theater, and the one for Lionel Hampton was done at the Metropole, which was a club at that time. So those were, you know, sort of, everything happened at night. Things of, you know, like, to me, 11 o'clock at night is very late now, you know.
Really?
4 o'clock in the morning was just the beginning of the morning at that time, beginning of the you know, so we would run around and do these things. So I had the pleasure of making these awards to these 3 artists. But Bud Powell was the one that I appreciated the most because I've been into mental health for 50 years, and I want to see us all well.
Yeah.
And I knew he was struggling.
Yeah.
And so to give him some recognition while he was still with us
Right.
Meant a lot to me.
Good moment. Let me put on a piece of music for you.
Thank you.
And I'm wondering when certain records were made, if you and Alfred had a feeling that this is going to be, you know, really good. This is going to be really good. This one's going to sell a lot of records.
But always wrong.
Always wrong?
Always.
No kidding.
The one, nobody knew that the Sidewinder was going to make
Yeah?
it. You know, it took off, and then they had to press more, of course. But no, but he had it on the beginning of the record. Maybe he had hope, but the public, in my opinion, cannot be predicted. And so, you know, they would, for one that was just magnificent, Donald Byrd. I'm trying to get home.
Yeah.
They thought they spent money that they really were very unhappy to spend that much money, and they wanted it to be the gigantic thing that it should have been, but it didn't. It was great. Wonderful music with Coleridge Perkins as the one who took care of the voices. I think we had, that was 18 vocals and the musicians. And even he was so uptight about it that when he was supposed to have Stanley Turrentine to do the saxophone, he says, suppose Stanley can't make it, then we're going to, you know, everything will go, you know. And so I said, why don't you do like the movies do and get a stand-in? And he got a stand-in who didn't actually come and play, but he got that stand-in, and that became one of his favorites, Joe Henderson.
Oh, my.
He was just beginning on the scene at that time.
Joe Henderson was standing in for Stanley Turrentine.
Yeah, but he didn't. I mean, now maybe that's an inside story. I don't know that.
You know,
but,
that's interesting.
Yeah, I think so, because he and Alfred, I think maybe one of the reasons that we eventually got into public access television is they always thought that records were just like a part of the visual thing, because they love live music. So television would be the next best thing. But somehow, music, jazz has not taken to television. Why, I don't know.
Yeah, that's really too bad. A number of people have mentioned that it's such a fertile ground for exposing anything, you know, and it's too bad we can't be more a part of that.
Isn't it?
You know, especially to reach young people.
Yes.
You know, but I think it's interesting that this song, that it did become so popular that it's still blues. It's based on the blues, you know, and it's got that groove.
What else?
It's got that groove, you know.
Yeah.
And you could dance to it.
Sure you can.
Yeah, right. Great stuff. Great stuff. Tell me about the decision to eventually sell Blue Note. And did you guys feel good about that? Was it time to do that?
The time to do it was actually 5 years before it was done. Frank had become ill, and Alfred also. And they struggled along for 5 years, trying to hang on, and they could not find a buyer. It was tough. And finally, after many, many efforts in that direction, a gentleman from California came and from Liberty Records and bought Blue Note.
Yeah.
And of course it was a sad day for Alfred and Frank, and even though Frank was seriously ill, he died just soon after, he decided to stay working for Liberty. Pardon me, no, I'm not correct there. He continued to work, and then Liberty sold to United Artists.
Oh.
And Frank continued, and Frank made produced some gorgeous records,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And then he became seriously ill in '72, and by that time Alfred and I had retired to Mexico. But I think truly Alfred never got over being out of Blue Note.
Now, as we look back on it, you know, he has such a wonderful legacy that the fact that it eventually was sold, I don't think it matters now. I think, look at what the product was, you know, priceless.
Yes.
And one thing we didn't even bring up really yet is the marvelous photography that is such a part of that. And I'm curious if Frank ever experimented with color with his photography. Did he ever shoot in color? Because it's all black and white, his photos, and they work so well.
He thought, I believe, that black and white was more artistic. And he did experiment toward the last, and then of course when Blue Note was sold to United Artists, then he did more in color. And I have those also.
Yeah.
But I prefer the black and white because I think they express the soul of the artist. You know, he was looking for that. He would stand with his light and looking over. He would stand forever to get that shot he
No
wanted
kidding.
to get. And when you see those pictures, you know, they're really art.
Yes,
Photography.
absolutely. It's a whole other contribution of Blue Note.
It is.
That those photographs stand on their own, you
Yes,
know.
they
And
do.
to have that with the music, hey, there's heaven.
Very
That's
much
great.
so.
We had looked at some of the gold records and so forth, and really great mementos that you have from those days. Tell me about the tribute in Japan.
Thank you.
came
My
about.
pleasure to tell you, because that was something I didn't understand. In 1984, we had relocated here in San Diego from Mexico. We spent 11 years in Mexico, which were wonderful. We did radio there, and we were able to play some jazz on Mexican radio. And we came here, and Alfred was very interested in television. We did a lot of more psychological programs. He was more, because I guess he felt, well, you supported me at Blue Note, now you're into psychology, let's do your psychology program. So he did. He supported me in that. And we had gone downtown to meet two psychological friends of mine, and it got very hot one of those days in August, early August in '84. And we came back, and we were getting ready to turn the corner to go home, and I saw him. We were talking. We always talked. He slumped over, and I didn't know what to do. I got to get to the hospital. And so I started blowing the horn hard and going about maybe 80 miles an hour, and got to the hospital and ran in, and my husband's had a heart attack. And the lady came out yelling code blue, and they got him there. And so then he did live that night, but they told me that he might not make it. He needed bypass surgery if he survived. And he did the next day. He was Alfred.
No kidding.
Yeah, he was laying there with these things tying him down and everything.
Yeah.
And he says, "Get these things off of me."
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was so glad for his temper to come
Yeah,
back.
right.
You know? And so he didn't want to get the bypass. We were too scared of it. And it was, at that time, very new. So there was something called chelation therapy that one of his friends had told him about, and so he decided he'd do that. And I'm glad he did, because he would have never gotten to Japan otherwise, I don't think. He took the chelation therapy for several months, and his personality, he never lost this terrific mind that he had, but his body got a little weak. Not too weak, but you know, because he was, but he got a telegram from Bruce Lundvall at Blue Note, no, at Capitol Records. We're going to, we have Blue Note now, and we're going to introduce the label. And so we went to New York for that, which was pretty terrific for him to do, a man who'd had cardiac arrest and been given up for dead, you know. And we went there, and we went through all of, did I show you the cover where the musicians were with him?
Yeah, I think that's here.
That was a magnificent time of his life. I know that meant the world to him. Here he is. And these are the guys, so many of them the guys that he loved. There's Bruce Lundvall. I don't think Michael Kaskuna. Bobby Hutcherson.
Yeah. Oh, lots of them.
Kenny Burrell.
Yeah.
Jimmy Smith. So many of the guys. And so he went through that. It was an ordeal. But the last day that we were there, Reed Miles, by the way, went over on the plane with us, which was wonderful because Reed was a riot. This guy, he was as absolutely wild as Alfred and Frank. And these are like wild men I'm talking about, you know? They were just not the average person in any way. So that last day, Leonard Feather, who was our close dear friend, and a number of people were giving us a go-away breakfast. And among those people were 5 people from Japan who we knew had attended the concert. But we didn't know particularly who they were. And so they were very kind to us and everything. And then we went back home, and he got word that they would like to have the Blue Note Festival at Mount Fuji. Well, right away I said, Alfred, no way. We can't do that. I mean, you know, we want to live, don't we?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I have to show you this picture of him when he's 70. This was after cardiac arrest. I want to show you how good he looked with the little blue suit on. He was a dandy, you know?
Oh,
this
gosh,
guy
look at
loved
that.
clothes. And so you see, you remember that song Elvis used to sing, the blue suede shoes?
Yeah.
They're the
Look
blue
at that, I'll
suede
be
shoes.
darned.
And he had been, you know, but anyway, we celebrated his birthday. We went over to our favorite place in La Jolla and celebrated. And there I have 100 pictures of Alfred. But anyway, these guys told him that they wanted him to come, and they were going to have Blue Note Festival at Mount Fuji. And I just had to be as firm as I could. We're not going to do it. Well, he went. You know, he knew I liked him to dress up, which he loved to dress up anyway. He went and he got himself all gorgeous. And we had a little patio, and I'm sitting there, and he comes out on the patio, and he says, puts his hands on his hips, and he says, I don't know about you. Maybe you're not going, but I'm going to Japan. Well, I couldn't say no.
That was pretty definite.
Yeah, he looked too fabulous with this little outfit that he had on. He had beige, and that was my favorite color on him, and he loved blue.
Yeah.
But so I just said, well, I can't win this one, and I have to let it go. And so we went, and it was very difficult because he got ill on the plane. We had to sit down in Hawaii and stay there for 3 days while he got better. And then we went to there, and they were kind enough to have a medical doctor in the suite next to us who was on call 24 hours, stayed with us, and saw that he had oxygen and everything. But he went through that whole, this picture here, this one I'd like to show. This was in a restaurant they took us to. Now this guy, this doesn't look like a mortally ill person, does it?
No, it doesn't.
He died 3 months later.
Oh.
But that festival, Herbie Hancock was there, Lou Donaldson was there. They got everybody that Alfred loved. And it was wonderful. But 30,000 people got up and gave him a standing ovation. And I think that's why I have heard it said that that's why he didn't die August the 8th from that cardiac arrest.
Yeah.
That he would have that, because there are no fans, in my opinion, like the Japanese fans.
Uh-huh.
They knew the song. I mean, they'd be, whatever it was, they'd be going along with the song and
Yeah.
everything, So it was wonderful. And the people who were there, Dr. Ogawa and Mr. Namakati and, gee, I can't at the moment, I can't recall. It was just so, it was like a life beyond life.
Yeah.
And so those people will always live in my heart. If I can't remember their
Right,
names
that's
always.
Well, gee, you've had, since Alfred passed, you have gotten into another dimension of entertainment and with your access cable work, and I wanted to congratulate you on your award
Thank you.
from the PACE organization.
Thank you.
And you must really enjoy working.
I do.
Yeah.
I learned that. I always enjoyed working, but I learned it from him because he was so in love with his work. In fact, on his gravestone, I had printed, "Through jazz, he lived the life he loved." And I learned that from him. You don't always feel like working, but if you love that work, you'll go ahead and do it,
Yeah.
sick or well.
Right. It's fortunate when you can work at what you love.
Yes.
Not
isn't it?
everyone's able to do that.
Not everyone.
Yeah.
But I think even so, maybe that's why the arts have become so prominent today, because everybody can have something that they enjoy, of the arts, whether
Yeah.
it's painting or sculpting or music, whatever it might be. You can add that dimension to your life and enjoy your life, because we can't all be into one thing that is our full life.
Right. Do you listen to current artists coming out these days?
I do. I have to say reluctantly that I listen not as much as I want to. I will be doing more listening, but at the present time I am more looking to produce quality television, and so I focus more on that. I do try to present music. I'm currently editing a big band. It's the San Diego Concert Jazz Band. I'm currently editing that, and that music is what I hear every day.
Yeah.
So it's I'm sort of a focused person. So the music that's wonderful today, yes, I try my best to keep up somehow with it, but I get kind of sidetracked with television.
Uh-huh. Do you still take an interest in the careers of people like Joe Henderson and
Very
that are
much,
they're still out there?
Sure. Herbie Hancock, Horace Silver, all the guys, Wayne Shorter, sure. I'm
Yeah.
very interested, and I'm always trusting that they continue for a long time.
Yeah. Is there anything that you would like to add about the Blue Note experience, or that I haven't touched upon?
You know, you have been so wonderful to bring out Blue Note today for me, and I think there's nothing I can add except thank you very much.
Well, it's been a real pleasure for me, and I appreciated being interviewed the other day too. And we'll probably just both look at these tapes, and we can
Yes.
have it's been a real enjoyable trip out to San Diego here. And San Diego has some good musicians itself.
Oh, hasn't it?
Yes, and I've managed to meet some of them, so it's been a wonderful experience. A great pleasure to meet you. So thank you very much.